I think about struggle in three different categories. There's healthy, normal struggles that we all go through to develop capability, character traits, etc. And then there are unhealthy struggles. This could be an illness. It could be a drug addiction, something significantly worse. And that's a struggle that we want to get out of it, improve our life condition as quickly as possible, but not make it our identity. We want to learn from it and apply that to create more value in the world. And third is just intentionally designed struggle. When you realize that struggle is something that we use to continually develop and improve, we can get a lot more intentional about that entire process. So, sort of an interesting question. I think we can all ask ourselves, is struggle good or bad? Do we get frustrated when it comes around? And another way to think about it, if we're trying to make our life as absolutely comfortable as possible, we are hindering our growth, and we're doing that in a number of different ways. And I think, for me, when I think about struggle, I'm always building my tolerance. It's not that I want to get up every day and struggle as hard as I possibly can and look for it everywhere. But in everything I do, I try to lean in to create more and more value. When you're on that edge, whether it's material value, positive emotional energy value, or spiritual/connectedness value, when you're on the edge of creating more, there's always a certain degree of struggle. And one of the questions I love asking groups when I work with them is, do you believe that you can develop physically, emotionally, or mentally without some kind of struggle? And there's always somebody in the group that says, well, no, you shouldn't have to. And then they kind of catch themselves, well, wait a minute. And then the consensus afterwards is, yeah, you actually have to struggle to some degree. And my definition of struggle is really any effort to improve a life condition, develop a character trait more fully, or build capability. So they can be micro struggles. It can be wildly intense. But I think it's important for all of us to be kind of looking for that, and over time, sort of elevating our struggle comfort zone, if you will. And I built up a pretty big tolerance over time, and I can create a lot more value when that happens. It helps me be a lot calmer in super stressful, situations. And so there's a number of different ways. You've got family, you've got business. If I think about business, a lot of leaders I work with, when things don't work out perfectly, just lay out exactly like they think they should go, they get very frustrated. And this is a negative energy that they're bringing to the situation that is not good for the team at all. And it's a lot better to, look at whatever's going on. If it's not going the way you want, one of my first questions is, well, does the team know what you really want? And a lot of times leaders haven't even communicated clearly what they want to happen. And when it doesn't happen, they get frustrated, believing everybody should just know what should have happened. So that's not good. And the mantra in my head when these sort of things happen is organize and develop. So I want to organize everything so I can see exactly what's going on. So I know exactly where to focus value creation efforts to get things back on track. I was recently working with a senior team at an organization that I'm helping lead right now. And we were talking about marketing and the cost to acquire a new customer coming in. And they said, hey, it's this amount, and here's our budget. This is what we're spending. So that's great. So I'm going to kind of keep track of this every day, and I want to see how it's going. And when I came back and said, it's actually 3 times what you're telling me that it is, how did you come up with that? And they said, well, this is what the calculator says. And I said, well, we probably should go check that. And one of the comments that came out of that conversation was, hey, I share your frustration. I said, wait a minute, I'm not frustrated at all. I just want to see it clearly. And I think about it sort of like a value creation funnel. On the marketing side, it's sort of awareness and then all these different stages to acquiring a client and then ongoing experience. So we keep them forever and they all tell 10 friends to come on board because they're getting so much value out of it. So when I organize it that way, I can see exactly where the stage in the funnel is that we need to improve. And once you improve that one, what needs to be improved can move around. It could be above it, could be below it. It really doesn't matter. So I always want to organize it. And I want to do it in a very positive way, not get frustrated that things didn't work out like I just magically thought they should happen, in front of me. And so the second part of that is develop, constantly nudging and develop the other team members, leaders, et cetera, to be thinking this way. And so do it right over time. They're always a few steps ahead of you. This is so much more productive than being, frustrated and bringing that energy to the team. And, you can be super passionate without being negative. That's for sure. And, short sort of personal story over the holidays that we just went through. Very good friend of mine and his family. I sort of informally adopted them. But his, he said over the holidays, he spent a lot of time with extended family members, and his kids, when they got back, they said, we want to adopt Lee. And he said, they call me Uncle Lee. And he said, it's because it's just always so positive in our exchanges. And I was thinking about that. And as we talked about it, I don't run in and jump up and down with positivity. But what I do is appropriately talk about what's possible when it comes to creating value for anything, kids of any age, adults, it really doesn't matter. And then engaging in sort of appropriately productive conversations to move in that direction. And that lands on people really well. That's something that I think we all can kind of work on rather than looking for the things that are wrong and getting frustrated. That's not a definition of struggling better. Let's look for what's possible and let's engage in productive conversations to get there. And it's amazing how that lands on people. It's so genuine in its actual value creation. It's not virtue signaling in any way. So that's something to think about. So as you look at what's going on in your life, we launch in, to this year, and this should be at any point in time. When I hear people talk about their New Year's resolutions, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't want to wait until, January 1st to do something. I always want to be moving forward on creating more value over time, material value, emotional energy value, and spiritual value. But as we look forward in this year, what's holding you back on the value that you want to create with your family, with your business? And, a simple example could be, I just like to have a lot more positive energy in the family more consistently. And a lot of leaders that I talk to, folks that are very stressed at work, there's a lot going on. There's always, things that are happening. It's challenging building a business, that's for sure. And it's not always perfect. But when they get home, they're distracted and that energy permeates out of the family. And so a simple example there, if you want to work on it, is how can I reset and be fully present and curious with my family so we can elevate the positive emotional energy in there? And so there's so many opportunities to create more value as a family. And you can look at all three buckets. It applies to the family for sure. What are the things that we can do to improve our material value creation so we can have more money to survive emergencies, maybe improve our lifestyle a little bit if we want to so we can pay for that? The emotional energy side, I just talked about it a little bit. I think just intentional awareness there, rather than getting frustrated and struggling in an unhealthy way, build your capability to create more positive emotional energy and do it intentionally. And I think every family member, when they're aware of it, it really makes a giant difference and it happens pretty fast. Same thing on the spiritual value creation. How would you rate the connectedness in the family with all the members with each other, communities that are important to you? And for sure, our kids with themselves, do they understand why they feel the way they do? How connected are they to what's really going on? And then a higher power, whatever is important to every family. But rather than getting frustrated in each of the categories, which will limit our ability to create value, let's actually lean in and embrace the struggle. It's kind of like, again, going to the gym. If I work out really hard, if I stretch every day, if I do this consistently over time with a really good cadence, that feels really good. And it's a struggle to do that. Same thing emotionally, same thing mentally, and all things value creation within your family as well as the business. And one of the things to prevent the frustration on the business side is to kind of put everything into value creation funnels. When you look at every leader and their team and what they're trying to accomplish, you can organize it by function inside the business, whatever you want to do, but think of it as a value creation funnel. How was that team designed or set up to create value? Do we know what that is? And where does it start all the way to creating that value coming out the other side that benefits the holistic, organization in a really positive way? And then where in that value creation funnel is there the limiting factor? And then once we improve that, where did that limiting factor move to? I think of it as just a really fun game to play in the business. Always moving around, looking for that value creation bottleneck and having fun with it and collaborating with other team members to do it. Another area that I see a lot of people get really frustrated and they don't struggle in probably the most healthy way is when it comes to their schedule. And some believe, maybe most believe, that they're just completely out of control when it comes to their schedule. It's not something that they can control. And I would argue that for sure, we all have, at least the vast majority of us, a lot more control over our schedule than we think. Like even with the family, if we sit down and say, hey, this is everybody's job for the family, kids have a job, the parents have a job, grandparents have a job, all of that. And we sit down and say, okay, we're clear on what everybody's job is. If we all do our job, we can hit our goals as a family a lot higher percentage of the time. Hey, and one of the things I'm struggling with is my schedule. I need help here. Here's where I'm trying to create value. This is my job for the family. How can I organize this better? And it's amazing how the family leans in to really help. And when they're aware of it, they really will help rather than just reacting to you being frustrated with that. Same thing at work. You can be turning your phone off or at least on, silent mode while you're doing specific work tasks. You can get with your team and say, this is where I think I create the most value in the organization. I really want your help to organize my time to do that the highest percent of the time. And I want to make sure that I'm dealing with all the, challenges and questions and other things that you need from me. Help me with this. And it's amazing how they will do that. But again, a lot of leaders will just get really frustrated with it and not deal with it directly. So ask for help. And I think when it comes to your schedule, you're just in a lot more control than you think you are. You just have to be super intentional about it. So I'll leave you with this. As you think about, going forward and the rest of this year and beyond, how can you struggle better? For those of you that have been listening to my podcast for a while, you know that I'm really big on creating holistic value and thinking about material value, emotional energy value, and spiritual or connectedness value, and how important it is to keep all of that in balance. And one that keeps jumping out at me when I'm working with folks, interacting with families is emotional energy. And I think it really comes down to, are you chasing mostly happiness or are you chasing fulfillment? And I see a lot of folks that seem to get what they want. They say they're unhappy, and if I could just have this happen or get this thing, all of a sudden things would be so much better. And then they get the thing and they're happy for about a minute, then they're right back into not being happy. And if emotional energy isn't high, it's really hard to be happy. I ask the question sort of to myself, where does emotional energy really come from? And I think it really does come from internal fulfillment. So when I see folks say, I'm really not happy in my job, if I just had a better place to work, everything would be better. I see them actually get the new job and then they're complaining about that place within 6 months, just like they did the previous place. So they're not happy. They're not fulfilled. Something else is going on and they're completely unaware of it. And I've seen that happen a number of times in the different companies that I've had over the years, where folks come in and they get the job and they did complain a lot about the previous job. And lo and behold, within 6 months, they're doing exactly the same thing. I've seen some say, hey, the family's super cramped in this smaller house. If we just had a bigger place to live in, things would be a lot better. They get the bigger home. They're happy for a minute. And then the same thing. They're not happy for the same reasons. They're unaware of it. They don't even know why. Or it could be a big payday. I know a lot of folks where they've got a business and they want to sell it and they're working really hard. There's all this stress. They're not focusing on the family because they're doing this for the family. And then they get the big payday and they're happy for a minute. And then the same thing, they sink right back into it. Also with relationships, I've seen a few over the years that say, just not happy in this relationship. If I had a better partner, everything would be better. And they get out of the relationship, they get a partner, they're happy for a minute, and then it goes right down again in the same thing. And I think the answer is somewhere in this distinction between fulfillment and happiness. So for me, my own internal most important number is fulfillment. And it's something that is kind of hard to measure, but I can feel whether or not I am more fulfilled over time or less fulfilled. I mean, that's kind of easy for me to assess. And there's a lot of things that I do that cause that to happen. And struggle is a giant part of it. I'm always the most fulfilled when I do something really hard and I come out the other side creating value, and it feels amazing. You get knowledge, you get wisdom, you can use that to help others. It's amazing. And what I love about my journey is, here we are, 63 years old now. And every year, at least for the last, I'd say 30, 40 years, I am accomplishing things that are really hard. I'm not happy all the time. I'm happy a lot of times, but I am more and more fulfilled every year. And that's something that just steadily, sort of climbs for me. And so I think a great hack around this, would be for anybody just to kind of write down what are the things that make you more fulfilled and what are the things that don't make you more fulfilled. And so for me, for example, anything I do to build and strengthen community is very fulfilling for me. And I took over as CEO for a company called Dinner Table in May of 24, so about 9 months ago as of this recording. The board of directors asked me to come in and to do this and said, great, we need to drop the previous business model that objectively didn't work. So why don't we start building communities of families to raise kids to create value in the world? And in about 9 months flat now, we have over 32,000 parents in our dinner table family community raising kids to create value in the world. That's why we're doing this, and a place to go for practical family wisdom and to build on it. That has been really, really hard and rewarding work. Lots of struggle to go from where we started to where we're at today, where we have a viable business, but an amazing mission at the same time. As I think about doing the job and back to my personal fulfillment, what's the mission? Is it really making positive, difference in the world? And brand integrity, everything has to be above reproach and moving forward and creating just so much value. And then I think about shareholder return. We need to do all of it. So I've got the material return for the shareholders. I've got the spiritual connectedness return with a mission and everything that we're doing from a leadership, brand integrity standpoint, all of that. I've got the emotional energy piece of it as I'm working with the team and managing. So through these challenges and all the changes that come with resetting a company, that's really, really hard work. And I think a lot of you listening probably have gone through aspects of that. Wildly fulfilling for me, just incredible. So when you think about your journey and how do you keep building on this internal fulfillment, and I also believe the more we do that, the more we're going to be happy and the more we're going to value struggle, where we're intentionally going into hard things where we won't be happy for a period of time, but we're more and more fulfilled and we're learning to really value struggle and advance. And we'll just sort of feel better as we go through this journey this way. So I think a great hack here in terms of being happy a higher percentage of the time, having emotional energy a lot higher, a much higher percentage of the time, and continually raising fulfillment would be write down the things that cause you to be more fulfilled and write down the things that cause you not to be more fulfilled and see if there's any correlation there. And obviously do more of the things that cause fulfillment and less of the things that don't cause fulfillment. And isn't it interesting when you think about community, go back 10 years, I think we probably had 8% of the population, depending on what you look at in terms of surveys, that say they're in a funk, they're kind of depressed, they're down. And then you fast forward today, and I think, here we are at the beginning of 2025, and it's 1 in 3 people are depressed, down. I'm not sure that they need to see anyone as far as professional from a clinical standpoint to really help them. I think a lot probably do. But that's incredible that about a third of the population in the United States is sort of down and in a depressive direction. And if we were just doing more to build and strengthen community, boy, that could do a lot to bring a lot of those folks out. So whatever that is for you, I think building community is something important to all of us. It's probably a hack that could help everybody listening. But work on that. Consider fulfillment maybe as your most important number. This is for leaders, and I want to talk about this concept of live resistance. In other words, the most value is created right on the front lines. Something a lot of folks don't know about me is that I taught Taekwondo martial arts for about 23 years, 5 years with an instructor where I learned martial arts, Taekwondo, another 4+ years with my own full-time school, and then another 14 years where I had a part-time school, and wildly rewarding. One of the things I noticed there is that when we'd go to competitions and I got to meet lots of instructors and like literally thousands of students, those that would work really hard, kicking and punching air and going through sparring drills, like work really hard at that, but not a lot of time actually sparring, they almost never placed in the top three in their particular bracket, virtually never. And those that spent most of the time sparring but didn't work nearly as hard would place in the top three a majority of the time. But even if they work equally hard, those that have that live resistance, they always got a better result. And no surprise, I know that sounds really obvious. And it's interesting watching some of the students over the years act like victims. They get very frustrated. I worked hard. I should be able to do this. And I see the exact same thing in business. And I think the vast majority of the value is created on the front lines with our team, with live resistance creating value. And as I think about it in the business world, for-profit, nonprofit, really any organization that's designed to create value, live resistance comes in the form of working with customers and team members, vendors, investors, really any and all stakeholders that we touch. So we've got all of these elements. Our job as a leader, whether we're a frontline supervisor and anything in between, all the way to the CEO running the business, we have these elements that we're supposed to be optimizing, leveraging all of them in the best possible way to create the most value that we can. I think one of the biggest mistakes or opportunities missed, I would say, for leaders is not clearly defining the value your team is supposed to create. As an organization, if you're the CEO, but as a team leader anywhere in the organization, really hard to get the team aligned to it. And when I think about leaning in, I want to lean in on 4 different areas. And I've talked about this before. Lean in on the business model, strategy, the value of your stuff, products and services, and on the culture side of things. So in the business model, again, we all need to understand how we price. We need to understand all the approaches and costs to deliver our products and services. We need to understand how we make money and get excited about, as we optimize this, the potential for future profitability. The more money we make, the more good we can do in the world, better for all stakeholders for so many reasons. And then strategy, back to just simplified approaches to increasing the value of your business. And it doesn't matter where you are leading within the organization, all of you can apply something in that strategy as it relates to your team to increase the value of the business. So really understanding that. And then still very common when you look at the actual perceived value from your customers around your products and or services, it seems like teams within the organization love their stuff more than their customers do. Obviously, you're in business, so they're buying your products or services. But do every one of your team members really understand how the customers feel about that so they can actually sink their teeth into improving the value that's perceived by the customers around your stuff? And then culture, what are the attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs that cause the most value to be created? Again, all of us, if we're working in an organization, I think of it as this big value creation machine, all these resources, people, customers, all these different elements that our job is to leverage and, get working really well together, this well-oiled machine, if you will, to create as much value as possible and more value over time. And, I think it's really important for all of us to be communicating in outcomes and refining the path to get there continually, appropriately along the way, over communicating in ideas and hoping for the best. I see a lot of startups that fail because they communicate in ideas, the founders, and hope for the best. So imagine this, you've got this idea and we're going to, change the world this way and it's going to be amazing. So you hire a bunch of really smart people. The idea wasn't theirs. They've never really thought deeply about this. And the founders say, okay, now you go make that happen. Well, no wonder it fails the vast majority of the time. And when we're thinking about a startup and we're leaning in with live resistance, we have the idea, how hard are we working to really vet the idea? It can't be this utopian state and how it's going to change the world. The idea for a business has to be how we're going to get there. Yes, the utopian state is the directional sort of compass that we have. Most of the time, successful companies will change direction quite a bit, iterate a lot to discover what's actually going to create all of this value in the world. So you've got the idea. Now we need to prove scalable traction. So if I'm a founder and I just give the idea to some really smart people, but it wasn't their idea, they hadn't thought deeply about it, how are they going to do it? Usually they're looking for, give me a checklist. I want to say that I did what I agreed to do. And that's where we fail. So as the founder, and I've done this a number of times myself, I've worked with a lot of startups. I am leaning in, I'm on the front line, live resistance, proving scalable traction. And it's really hard because we've never done it before. We have to go figure it out. We know it's possible. We know there's a way. We don't know what it is. And it's our job to discover it. But that's the live resistance. And once we get the scalable traction, now we need to start packaging so we can scale. And that's really hard. There's a lot that goes into that. There's always things we didn't think of. And it can take a decent amount of time to actually get there. And then there's actually scaling, which is equally hard. So you've got all these stages of a startup, from idea to proving scalable traction, packaging to scale and scale. At each of those stages, until it gets off and running, if you're the CEO or the founder, you have to lean in this sort of full contact live resistance. And if you do that, wow, the chances of success are, significantly greater. This live resistance, there can be a lot of struggle that goes with it. I've worked with a number of clients. This has happened way more than once, where you've got a number of partners, and unfortunately, one of them not that ethical to extremely unethical, has their best interest in mind, not thinking about creating value for the collective, for the business, for all the stakeholders. And the right thing is to separate, so those individuals can go find the right culture for themselves, and the broader team, the bigger team that's really on the same page and they want to create value together. They don't end up having that element with them, and they don't want to have the conversation, and they'll act like victims. And I can't believe this is happening. And some of the best leadership work I've ever done has been leaning in to help them through that process and drive for it. And a lot of struggle and going through that. A number of times I've been quite the punching bag. But fast forward 2, 3, 4 years, the company's worth 50 times what it was than when we started that process and separated from a founder in this example. And everybody is so thankful and so glad we went through it. But they're not willing to lean in. They just sort of step back and say, gosh, I don't want to have difficult conversations, and this shouldn't be this way and it should be that way. But the more we lean in with live resistance to create value, wow, we can really create so much more and so much faster. And whether we're a startup and we're getting it off the ground, sort of following what I'm talking about here, or we're an established company starting a new product line, if you lean in with this live resistance, with all of these elements right on the front line, you're going to create a lot more value a whole lot faster. So I guess the question here for all of us, what percentage of the time are we or are you actually spending creating value with live resistance versus just thinking about it and reading the latest business book? I believe a big challenge in the United States right now is that we're drifting away from having healthy communities, really strong communities where we have each other's back and we're building on the value we create, always a place to go. We feel stronger, everything that can go with a healthy community. And I think a big part of that is making space for families to have the right conversations. We're really not doing that anymore. And to tackle this challenge, I agreed to become CEO of a company called Dinner Table about 9 months ago. And there was a business model that didn't work. And the board of directors asked me, hey, what would you do? And I said, well, I've been thinking about this community model for quite some time. So why don't we create a community of families raising kids to create value in the world and be a place to go for practical family wisdom and to build on it? And it's been interesting over the last 9 months. We literally have over 32,000 parents, guardians in our Dinner Table family community just incredible how fast it's growing. My guess is in another year, we're going to have well over 100,000 members in the community. And it's really designed for families to intentionally think about creating value. It's an evergreen journey. I'm fully committed to the value creation journey, not the bullet points or the elements of what we're actually teaching. And even though I've written the foundational sort of facilitation curriculum for the first year, again, not committed to that. I'm committed to the conversations we're having as families and how we're really objectively and measurably creating more value as a family as we go forward. So some of the examples, this first year journey that we're on, the first session, we think about what are the traits we would like our kids to have when they launch into adulthood. And these character traits can be honesty, integrity, perseverance, kindness. It can be whatever's important to the family. But we think about that and then we back up and say, okay, what can we do today if your kids are 3 years old, 6 years old, doesn't really matter, to get them ready to have these character traits when they launch into adulthood. The next month, we talk about healthy struggles and changing our relationship with struggle. There's normal healthy struggles. Let's not take them away from the kids. I've seen a lot of helicopter parenting, if you will, where they remove all struggle from the kids. And by the time they're an adult, they're just not ready for adulthood. I'm even seeing a lot of examples of helicopter teaching where the kids in the classroom and the teachers are taking all the struggle away from the kids. So they're really not going through these normal healthy struggles required to be a thriving, value creating adult. There's also unhealthy struggles. We want to change their perspectives around that to where we improve their life conditions as quickly as possible. Could be an infection, could be, any kind of it could be a drug addiction, any kind of unhealthy struggle. Let's not make it our identity. Let's actually learn from that, change it, and then use that to create even more value in the future. And then there's intentionally designed struggle to build capability and character traits. There's a lot of that we can be doing as parents, with our kids, as well as all of us as adults. And then, what's the return on investment for families doing this, intentionally thinking about that? Most families really don't think about that. Helping kids discover their value creation superpowers, house rules, what's everybody's job for the family, and being super intentional about that. At what age do your kids pick up expenses? How does that change as they get older? How do they earn money? How do they think about all that stuff? Financial competency. How do we apply all of these money skills to being able to, really create value in the world, get the most value for what we spend, the most value for trading our best efforts when we're doing work for others? Family forecast, which includes budgeting. I actually think it's a good idea for every family member, even as young as 6 years old, to have a line item on the budget that they're responsible for, so they learn about this, and it's all very transparent. And then legacy over inheritance. How are we creating holistic value as a family and growing that generation to generation, not just dividing and hoping for the best on the material side, but all of the value creation as a family, what it feels like to be in the family history, the stories, growing the spiritual value creation, the connectedness with all the family members, a higher power, whatever's important to each family. And then, sort of deeper dives on what is material value creation and how we can continually create more as a family so we can better survive emergencies, surprises that come up, pay for college, have enough in retirement where we've got a nice lifestyle, et cetera. Emotional energy value creation deep dive, spiritual value creation deep dive. And then how are we doing annual check-ins, and are we having sort of intentional dinner table conversations at least once a week to talk about how we're creating value as a family? There's so much that we can do there. And this journey's only been, 9 months since we started building it. It's pretty incredible how fast the community is growing. So that tells me, wow, there's really something here. There's a huge need for it. And of our 32,000 plus members, we're in 67 different countries. So incredible. So this seems to be a global sort of universal, issue and challenge and something that we all are looking for with our families. And I started 2 communities, and I started one 6 months ago for the parents of these kids in a particular micro school. And it's been amazing the changes that I've seen. the relationship with struggle, where they used to think about struggle as bad. Now they see it as actually a really good thing a lot of the time with the kids. And even for the parents, it's changing their perspective around that. And something that the leaders at this particular school told me, they've been in business, providing these micro schools for the students for 8 years. And for the first time ever, they're seeing the parents dropping each other's kids off and hanging out with each other. And that's all happening because of this monthly conversation that we're having and all the interactions between the meetings around these topics that I just mentioned. One of the things I love is that the kids are telling me, gosh, like it's an epiphany, I can create value in the world. And a big part of what we're doing is changing the perspective that these kids have. You can start anywhere and go everywhere. There's really no end to what you can accomplish, but you have to start. You have to give it your best. There isn't a magic pill or silver bullet that's going to get you there. You have to earn this stuff all the way. Enjoy the journey. Make that happen. The second community I started was this past weekend, another micro school, a micro school high school. And the parents and a lot of the kids came in, and I'd say my biggest takeaway at the end when I was asking for feedback from everyone, hey, what did you get the most out of this? And one of the parents said, and there was a lot of agreement with this, they never make the time to have these value creation conversations. And taking a couple of hours once a month to intentionally do that and then have that reframe how we do it as a family, so much value there, just incredible. And all of this, again, is about creating value holistically as a family on the material side, the emotional energy side, the spiritual or connectedness side. And just imagine you've got a community of families and you say, look, I'd really like to improve our financial condition. Here's what I'm doing today. This is how we're going after it. And I'd like to improve it by at least 5 or 10% over the next year. And if you have a number of other families giving you ideas around that, odds are you're going to be able to do that. And you can repeat that every single year going forward to strengthen the financial condition of your family. And I'm particularly interested in working with low and middle income families because I think that's where the largest pent up, untapped value creation potential is. We just have to change perspective over there. I came from a very low income family and I was able to build, really multi-generational wealth in just my time here. And I think all of these kids can do the same or better. No question in my mind. So super excited about that. The kids in these lower income families especially have the drive. When I work with kids in more affluent families, they're kind of out of balance. They never really had to work for the money most of the time, not in all cases. But it's going to take them a lot longer to get there. They take more for granted. But these low income families, they just don't. So I love working with them more than any other group. So again, holistic value as a family. How do we create more in this generation, pass that on, build on it generation to generation? And working with other families on creating value in any of the three buckets is going to get you there a lot faster than just working in isolation with only your family. And then we start thinking intentionally about the circles that we interact with. So with our kids, who are their circle of friends? What are the sort of values or character traits of those friends? And can we be more intentional about that? So they're thinking about value creation. As parents, we can help them with it. What about us, as parents? What are we doing essentially in terms of selecting the friends and families that we interact with on a regular basis? So we can be more intentional about that. We can help each other create more and more value over time. And so for me, this is all about strengthening community. And the reason I do it, and by the way, as CEO of Dinner Table, I'm not taking $1. It's been a lot of work over the last 9 months and I'm loving it. Loving the time with communities, not taking any money to do it because my return is the emotional and spiritual value creation piece and strengthening these communities. And the more we get it right for our kids and more families out there, it's a much better world for me, my family, my friends, my communities to interact with. So that's why I do it. And what I would challenge you with here is, as I close, What can you do to strengthen your communities? One of the questions coming in through the Leadership Value Lab members is when to let go in business. And it typically comes in a couple of areas. It's around people and it's around initiatives. And I believe that everything we do should be done at least with the intent of making things measurably better, and that everything else is a waste of time and resources. And sometimes we get it wrong with the absolute best of intentions. So taking the people part first, I believe when you do it right, every team member should know exactly where they stand regarding performance and what's expected 100% of the time. They should just have that. And when you bring a team member on board, think of it as an investment. And it's a simple math calculation. If you pay $15 an hour or $300,000 or $500,000 a year, what's the ROI going to be on that investment? And I love the idea of being just so clear to say, look, we're hiring you to create this value. Here's what needs to happen. This is what you're going to own. This is how we're going to measure it. What do you think about that? And virtually every time they say, absolutely, I believe I can do that. And then add the second part of that conversation. Wonderful. Now, if you fall below this line at any point in time, this isn't going to work because we're investing to get this return, and all the team members in the organization depend on this. Super important. And every time I've had that conversation, the answer has always been, wow, if I can't hit that, then they'll say sometimes, hey, something's wrong with me. And I always say, no, nothing's wrong with you. You're trying. And if it doesn't work out somewhere in the future, we appreciate that you tried and we'll help you with the transition. It's not personal at all. It's something we need for the business. So when it comes to the people side, a lot of leaders hold on way too long. They're afraid to have the conversation. They haven't been clear about what's expected and where they stand regarding performance. So it becomes a very difficult conversation. A lot of times the direct report they need to let go that isn't performing hasn't even been told they're not performing. So it is an uncomfortable conversation. And if we get it right, and we've had that upfront conversation, usually 9, 10 times out of 10 or more, the team member being let go is not surprised at all. They shouldn't be surprised. I mean, sometimes people have an emotional reaction to something. They're disappointed maybe in themselves because they weren't able to achieve the thing they set out to achieve. But get this right, it's a much easier conversation. And now you've kind of set the time frame as to when and actually how to let go when it comes to the people side. So hopefully that's helpful. The second part is around initiatives. It could be a new service, a new product, something that we're putting in place. We're investing time and resources into it, and we hang on to it way too long and it's not working out. And this can happen in so many ways. Established businesses can have it happening. Startups can have it happening. It's really common in startups where money's being invested that they're doubling down on something that just isn't working. And they stay way too long. And sometimes, unfortunately, they run out of money and everything's done where they could have pivoted a lot sooner. So I think when it comes to initiatives, it's important that we lay that out similarly to the way I just talked about it with people. Here's what we think we're going to accomplish in terms of a return for the business for doing this. Here's what we think the timeline is. And that's great. We all get agreement on it. And at any point in time, if it falls below this, we need to meet, have a discussion around it as to when we can change. Now, you may not even have the luxury of enough resources to stay too long, so it's going to force your hand. Sometimes, organizations have a lot of resources and just let things go, and they end up wasting money for a really long time. A better approach would be if we start this new initiative, this new business, this new product line, service, whatever it is, we're going to invest X to get this return. This is how long we think it'll take to have it happen. This is what we project to have happening. And at any point in time, if it falls below this line, we are going to pull the plug or pivot. And we have an approach to how we would pivot and look at that. And if there's not a pivot that makes sense from an idea standpoint, we just pull the plug and we're absolutely done. And every time it doesn't work out with a team member because they didn't achieve the outcomes that they were hired to achieve, or an initiative doesn't work out and we end up pulling the plug, it is never a complete loss if you choose to learn from that experience. So when it comes to the people side, we get better when it doesn't work out at how we interview, and we want to reflect appropriately and incorporate that into our interviewing process. So when we're hiring, we're getting it right a higher percentage of the time. And finding superstars, especially as you move up to the top of an organization, if you get it right half the time, like really right, you're doing incredibly well. You get it right 75% of the time, you're kind of a unicorn. So managing expectations there, I've always said, I might have to do this 2, 3, and sometimes 4 times to really get it right, but it's worth the investment to get it right. Easier to get it right a much higher percentage of the time as you get closer to the front lines, because we're talking about things that are, very well defined in terms of skills and what needs to get done. As you become a senior leader, you have to be better at connecting all of these dots and making all these decisions. And a few of these decisions create by far the most value in every organization. And a few decisions can destroy the most value as well. So it's harder to get it right as a senior leader. But whenever you get it wrong, it doesn't matter where it is in the organization, there's a lot to learn there about improving the process going forward. And then same thing with initiatives. I personally have invested a lot of money in different things that didn't work out, learned so much where I'll take the learnings and apply it to another initiative or another business that I'm starting, or helping a client with their business, to help them learn from that so they can create value even faster and not fall into, certain traps. And when I think about a startup or a new initiative in an established company, new product, new service, whatever it is, there's 4 stages here. And I've talked about this before on previous podcasts, but there's the idea and how well you think through that and why it will work. It can't be, oh, here's this utopian state, and when we get there, it'll just be amazing and everybody will be making money and the world will be better. No, the idea has to be how we're going to move in that direction. And there'll likely be pivots along the way, and we have to manage expectations and understand that. So once we get the idea right, then, well, how would the business model work out? How's this really going to create value for the organization? And all of our decisions have to kind of fit into that. And then there's, hey, we've got some provable traction here on this new service or product or this business that we're starting up. That's wonderful. Now, how do we start packaging that so we can scale? So there's a lot that goes into that, almost no into it. And then the last step is scaling. And I think all 4 of those stages, from the idea to the business model to packaging to scaling, they're all incredibly hard. And I think the one that most don't spend enough time on is the idea piece of it. They just start running with something because it makes sense without really checking it out before they move forward. So I think that, the big lesson here for me, and all the times that I've done this, be super clear with team members about what's expected, and at every point in time where they stand regarding performance, when it's not going to work out because we're not getting the return on investment for this. And then same thing with initiatives, be super clear about what's expected, and measurably so when we're going to either pivot or pull the plug. Hope this is helpful. I want to talk about the value of having an MOS as an organization, or management operating system. And I think first we have to address how it's typically introduced to an organization and why it's introduced. And usually it's a smaller organization that's, cranking along, working really hard. They've figured out where scalable traction is, and they're starting to grow. At least they want to, but they're stuck. And the CEO, the founder, they're looking for some way to get unstuck and take the next step. So they go to their friends, maybe their CEO peer advisory groups, and ask the question, what should we do? And there's always lots of options for how to do that. And typically it's some sort of a management operating system. There's a whole bunch of them out there. There's probably close to a dozen popular operating systems. And there's thousands and thousands of other operating systems that are just one-off, designed by a consultant or a manager that figured something out and now they want to take it to the world. The thing I like about a management operating system is that it's a very intentional way, typically, of increasing the value of an organization. So things are stuck. They're not going as fast or as well as the senior leadership wants them to, so they implement it. And then what are some of the things you hear from the team as they start rolling it out? I've heard everything from, why are we doing this, to this is the dumbest thing ever. This is complete crap. I don't want to do it. Makes no sense. Why can't we just work harder? Why do we need to do any of this? And the question I like to ask at that point is, do you think it's possible to grow the business? Following up to that, what's the value in growing our organization, and more specifically, growing the value of the business? And usually everyone says, absolutely, we can do that. And if their approach is everybody just work harder, not really change how we do the work, remind them that, hey, we have been stuck for a while. We're not going nearly as fast as we all want to. It can be frustrating at times. So we really want to organize that, have a common way of creating value as an overall team. And then over time, we can refine that. And by the way, everybody will get a say in how we refine and apply all of this stuff. And that starts to kind of drop the objections to it. And then you get to, if not a management operating system, i.e. a common way of creating value throughout the organization, which, by the way, isn't telling everybody exactly what to do. It's just saying when you do your work, here's how you align with everybody else in the organization to create the most value collectively. It's how we collaborate, communicate, all of that, so we can get better and better over time going through it. Now, all of a sudden, it starts to make sense. If some of the folks are still kind of, stuck in their way, like, I still don't want to do this, it makes no sense, then ask the question, well, what's the alternative? We've been stuck for a year, 2 years, 3 years. I've seen companies stuck for longer than that. Ask the question, what's the alternative? You've said we can get better. It's not happening, essentially just letting everybody run with whatever they're doing. And that gets them to think about it. So now we want to start implementing an operating system. So what is it really? At the top of an organization, let's just say a for-profit business, the job of the CEO is to continually and responsibly increase the value of the business. So if that's the case, by proxy, the leadership team collectively, their job is to do the same thing. And so when one leader and their team creates the design value that they were hired to create, if they hit their goals, that should all start accreting or adding up to where it's increasing the overall value of the business. Now, what I want to know is, one, at the very top, I'm just stepping all the way back. Let's say we want to increase the value of the business 20% over the next year, and we made $1 million in profit last year. We want to grow it to 1.2 million. Great. So at any point in time along the way, are we on track? Yes or no? And then when I look at all of the leaders and the value that they and their teams were hired and their teams were designed to create, that function or the department in the organization, are they on track with their one number that says they're creating the value that they were designed to create? So if I can see that across the board, the next thing I want to know is, what's the best work everybody's doing to, create that value? And if we're not on track, what are we doing to get back on track? Preferably everybody's overdriving a bit, but we want to keep it all in balance. And then I want to know, well, how are you collaborating with everyone else in the organization? And there's something I like to call the value creation flow structure, where it's everything from awareness, how do people even know you exist as an organization, to marketing qualified leads that turn into sales qualified leads that turn into sales that are closed. And then we're selling our product or service. We have ongoing customer experience. And there's a support structure to all of that value flow structure that we have, like operations or finance, legal, admin, all that kind of stuff. So when I look at that, is everybody doing their best work? Are they connected together? So we're creating value together and the most that we can over time, so we can reap the benefits of growing the value of an organization for all the stakeholders, especially all the team members working in the organization. So having a management operating system, it really is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly important. And again, if you're doing it right, everyone has a say to some degree in how you're refining and continually improving that operating system. And it'll start to become a lot more fun. When a company's stuck, it's not a lot of fun. And you could be working twice as hard than the times where you're stuck, but you're making great progress. Now it's a lot of fun. And you can tell you're doing the right work when the harder it gets, the harder you laugh. And it should be fun. Everyone has a say in it, and it's about creating more and more value over time. So what I would say is, give it a chance. Having a common way or a management operating system, I wish we called it a value creation system, and that was a standard business term for it, because that's really more what it is. How well are we working together developing every team member, every leader, refining all of our systems and practices, all the rituals that we consistently do that cause the most value to be created. That's a value creation system. It's also, typically called a management operating system.